The moon hung low in the sky, a pale disk casting elongated shadows across the deserted streets. The air was thick with anticipation, and every rustling leaf seemed to echo through the silence. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my footsteps muffled by the fallen leaves. The streetlights flickered, their feeble glow offering little solace. I had always been wary of walking alone at night, but tonight was different. Tonight, the darkness seemed to seep into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. The houses on either side stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark and uninviting. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The wind whispered secrets as it wound through the narrow alleyways. I quickened my pace, my breath misting in the frigid air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched my every move. Was it paranoia, or was there truly something lurking in the shadows? As I turned the corner, I saw her, a figure standing beneath the flickering lamppost. She wore a tattered dress, her face obscured by a veil. Her eyes, though, bore into mine, pale, unblinking orbs that held centuries of sorrow. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. Who was she? What did she want? Lost, my dear. Her voice was a soft murmur like the rustle of leaves. Fear not. I can guide you. I should have run, but curiosity held me in place. She beckoned, and I followed, my footsteps echoing hers. The lampposts grew scarcer, and the darkness thickened. The houses leaned in, their windows now gaping maws. The veil-clad woman led me deeper into the heart of the night, and I wondered if I had stepped into another realm, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. Listen, she said, her voice barely audible. Listen to the whispers of the forgotten. They speak of lost souls, of regrets that cling like cobwebs. Do you hear them? And I did. Faint cries, distant laughter, and the mournful wails of those who had walked this path before me. Their stories merged into a cacophony of despair, and I stumbled, my legs weakening. The veil fluttered, revealing her face, a visage both beautiful and grotesque. Her eyes held mine, and I saw eternity reflected there. Why? I choked out. Why lead me here? Because, she said, her breath cold against my cheek. You carry a burden, a secret you've hidden even from yourself. Tonight, the shadows demand payment. I remembered then, the accident, the guilt that gnawed at my insides, the life I had taken, the soul lost to my recklessness. The veil-clad woman smiled, and her teeth were sharp as shards of glass. Walk, she commanded. Walk until dawn, and your debt shall be paid. I stumbled forward, my legs leaden. The whispers grew louder, their words clawing at my sanity. Faces appeared in the darkness, accusing, pleading, vengeful. I recognized them, the victims of my carelessness. Their eyes bore into mine, and I wept, my tears freezing on my cheeks. The night stretched on, an eternity of remorse. The veil-clad woman walked beside me, her steps soundless. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she vanished, leaving me standing at the edge of a cliff. Below, the churning sea beckoned. I stepped off, my heart lighter, my debt repaid. But as I plummeted, I heard her whisper in the wind. Fear not, my dear. We all walk alone at night. And so I joined the forgotten, my soul merging with the shadows, my story woven into the fabric of the night. It was a chilly autumn night, and the rain was falling in a relentless, rhythmic pattern. Amber had stayed late at her friend's house, losing track of time amidst laughter and shared memories. Now, she regretted it. The streets were eerily deserted, the dim glow of the streetlights distorted by the heavy rain. The news of a serial killer on the loose had dominated the headlines for days. The police had warned everyone to stay indoors after dark, but Amber had thought herself safe. Now, with each step she took, fear gripped her tighter. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet, empty street, each splash of water amplifying the silence that surrounded her. Amber pulled her hood tighter around her face, her eyes darting to every shadow. She could almost feel the eyes of the killer on her, lurking, waiting. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and the chill seeped into her bones. The walk from her friend's house to her own was normally a 10-minute journey, but tonight it felt like an eternity. She decided to take a shortcut through the park, hoping to cut down on her time exposed to the elements and the potential threat that seemed to lurk around every corner. The park was even more desolate than the streets, the trees swaying ominously in the wind, their branches creaking and groaning. Amber's heart pounded in her chest as she entered the park. The path was slick with rain, and she moved cautiously, her sneakers struggling to find purchase on the wet ground. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her jump. She clutched her phone in her pocket, fingers hovering over the emergency call button. The memory of the news broadcast replayed in her mind, the grim-faced reporter, the stark crime scene photos, the police chief's urgent warning. A sudden noise behind her made Amber whip around, her breath catching in her throat. She saw nothing but darkness and the blurred outlines of trees. She quickened her pace. Any further noise. The rain seemed to fall harder, the wind howling through the trees. She could barely see a few feet in front of her, the path a dark, winding ribbon stretching out endlessly. Amber started walking again, faster this time. She could feel the panic rising, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. She broke into a run, her feet slipping and sliding on the wet path. She didn't care if she fell. She just needed to get away, to find safety. She spotted the faint outline of a bench up ahead and darted toward it, hoping to hide, to catch her breath. As she crouched behind it, she pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She managed to call 911 and darted toward it, hoping to hide, to catch her breath. As she crouched behind it, she pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She managed to call 911, whispering her location to the operator, her voice trembling with fear. "Stay on the line," the operator instructed. "Police are on their way." Amber nodded, even though she knew the operator couldn't see her. She clutched the phone to her ear, listening intently. The footsteps had stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rain and her own ragged breathing. She peeked over the bench but saw nothing. Had she imagined it? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, standing at the edge of the path. Amber's heart nearly stopped. The figure was tall, wearing a dark coat, a hood obscuring their face. They stood motionless as if listening, searching. Amber pressed herself against the bench, praying they wouldn't see her, wouldn't hear her. The figure started moving again, slowly, methodically, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Amber's mind raced. Should she run, stay hidden? She gripped her phone tighter, trying to control her breathing, her body trembling with fear. The figure drew closer, and she could make out the glint of something metallic in their hand. A knife. Amber's terror reached a crescendo. She had to move, had to do something. She sprang from her hiding spot, sprinting down the path, not daring to look back. The sound of footsteps followed her, faster now, more urgent. She could hear the figure closing in, could almost feel their breath on her neck. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead. But she kept running. The exit to the park was just ahead, the streetlights beyond a beacon of hope. She pushed herself harder, praying she would make it. She burst out of the park, nearly collapsing on the sidewalk, her eyes scanning the street for any sign of the police. Then she saw them, flashing lights, a patrol car speeding towards her. Relief washed over her, and she waved frantically, stumbling towards the car. The officer jumped out, rushing to her side, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay? Did you see him?" he asked, helping her to her feet. Amber nodded, tears streaming down her face. She pointed back toward the park, struggling to catch her breath. He's in there. He has a knife." The officer radioed for backup, his partner already moving toward the park entrance. Amber watched as more patrol cars arrived, officers spreading out, searching the darkness. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see a paramedic, her expression kind and reassuring. "You're safe now," the paramedic said softly. "We'll take care of you." Amber nodded, allowing herself to be led to the ambulance. She sat down, her body trembling uncontrollably. The paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, offering her a warm drink. Amber sipped it gratefully, the hot liquid soothing her frayed nerves. As the night wore on, the police conducted a thorough search of the park. They found no sign of the killer, but Amber knew she hadn't imagined it. The terror she felt was real, the threat palpable. She vowed never to walk alone at night again, the memory of this harrowing experience forever etched in her mind. Amber returned home later that night, exhausted and shaken but alive. She locked the door behind her, double-checking it before collapsing onto her bed. The events of the night played over and over in her head, but she knew one thing for sure. She had survived, and for that, she was grateful. James Marshall walked briskly down the deserted streets, his heart pounding in his chest. The city felt unusually quiet tonight, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to flicker with malicious intent. His paranoia was understandable, given the events of the past few weeks. Just a month ago, James had been a respected manager at his company. That was before he got fired due to allegations of embezzlement, accusations he knew were false. His life had unraveled quickly. The worst part was knowing who had orchestrated his downfall. Marcus Reed, a vindictive co-worker with a grudge. Marcus had always envied James's position and seized the opportunity to ruin him. Marcus was fully aware that James would seek revenge in order to prove his innocence, so Marcus wanted to get rid of him, to hide the truth. Fear of retaliation had driven James to walk home tonight. He couldn't afford a taxi, and the thought of taking public transport filled him with dread. It wasn't just Marcus he feared, it was everything that came with him. Rumors around the office had always hinted at Marcus's connections with unsavory characters. James had dismissed them as idle gossip, but now he wasn't so sure. The streets became darker as he left the main road, the streetlights thinning out until they were almost non-existent. He pulled his coat tighter around him, not just against the cold, but as a flimsy barrier against his growing sense of dread. His footsteps echoed loudly, the only sound in the silence of the night. As he turned onto Elm Street, a narrow alleyway that served as a shortcut to his apartment, the air seemed to thicken with a sense of foreboding. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows and dimly lit corners, a place where nightmares could easily take shape. Halfway through, he heard it, a faint, shuffling noise behind him. He quickened his pace, trying to convince himself it was just a stray cat or a homeless person settling down for the night. But the noise persisted, growing louder, more deliberate. He dared not look back, his mind conjuring images of Marcus or one of his cronies, ready to exact some form of revenge. Then he heard the whisper, so soft it was almost inaudible. "James." His blood ran cold. He stopped, frozen in place. The sound had been so clear, so close. Slowly he turned around, his eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. The alley seemed empty, but he could feel a presence, an oppressive weight pressing down on him. "James." The whisper came again, this time from the direction he had been walking. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out rational thought. Panic set in, and he started to run. The alley seemed to stretch on forever, the exit always just out of reach. The whispers followed him, growing louder, more insistent. He burst out of the alley and onto a slightly more illuminated street. Gasping for breath, he looked around wildly. The street was empty, but he could still feel eyes on him, watching, waiting. He forced himself to keep moving, determined to get home. As he neared his apartment building, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. Standing under the flickering streetlight was Marcus, his face partially hidden in the shadows. He was smiling, a sinister curve of his lips that spoke of dark intentions. James felt a surge of fear and anger. He couldn't let Marcus intimidate him like this. He took a step forward, ready to confront him, but as he did, Marcus vanished. He blinked, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. The streetlight continued to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. He hurried inside the building, slamming the door shut behind him. The lobby was dimly lit, the old fluorescent lights buzzing ominously. He hurried to the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly. The doors finally opened with a creak, and he stepped inside, feeling a momentary sense of relief as they closed. The elevator ride was excruciatingly slow, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. As it ascended, the lights flickered, casting fleeting shadows on the walls. James leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. He could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, seeping into his mind. When the elevator doors finally opened, he stepped out into the dimly lit hallway of his floor. It was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, amplifying every tiny noise. His apartment was at the end of the hall. He moved quickly, fumbling for his keys. As he unlocked the door, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He spun around, expecting to see Marcus or something worse, but the hallway was empty. Shaking, he stepped inside and locked the door behind him. The familiar surroundings of his apartment brought a momentary sense of comfort, but it was quickly overshadowed by the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to cling to him. He checked every room, every corner, ensuring he was alone. Satisfied, he collapsed onto the couch, his mind racing. He needed to calm down, to think rationally. But the whispers had followed him, echoing through his apartment, growing louder, more malevolent. "James!" He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder. The lights flickered, casting shadows. He needed to calm down, to think rationally. But the whispers had followed him, echoing through his apartment, growing louder, more malevolent. "James!" He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder. The lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Panic clawed at him, and he looked around wildly, searching for the source of the whispers, more malevolent. "James!" He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder. The lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Panic clawed at him, and he looked around wildly, searching for the source of the whispers. His eyes fell on the mirror in the hallway. For a moment he saw his own reflection, pale and terrified. Then the shadows seemed to close in on him, suffocating, oppressive. He felt a hand on his shoulder, icy cold and impossibly strong. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. As the darkness closed in, he realized the terrible truth. This wasn't just Marcus's doing. This was something far worse, something beyond the realm of the living. The whispers were not just threats. They were promises of what was to come. Unfortunately, James Marshall was never seen again. His apartment remained empty, a place of whispers and shadows.